أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين سيدنا والنبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين روحي وأرواح العالمين لتراب مقدمه الفدا ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, salamun alaykum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Let's start off again, as we did last night, with the questions from the previous night. First question says, based on the beginning of your lecture, are you saying that equality is unfair and we shouldn't always resort to equality? Instead, justice is the fairest. So obviously for this type of question, if we go into kind of broad categories, it'll be a bit tough. Our point was saying that sometimes people define justice as equality, that everybody has to get the exact same thing, and that might not always be just, right? We gave the simple example of a teacher giving everybody in class the same grade, despite the amount of effort that they put in, despite the actual answers that they put on the test. We said that giving everybody the same thing doesn't make sense. That's not just. You might be oppressing somebody unintentionally. The second question, why make the perfect apple in the first place? So this was in regards to the analogy we gave yesterday. We were highlighting this point about the reason for creation. Why were we created? Why mankind? Why not put us straight in heaven or straight in hell? So again, I said before, the details of this, we're going to have a separate lecture devoted to the reason for creation. But again, I can give a short answer for you to think about before we have that session. Why is it that we need a perfect apple? Why did God need a perfect creation? And I said yesterday, the reason is because it's possible. And deep down, us as dependent beings, as contingent beings, as being mumkin, as being possible, we have this deep desire to go towards perfection. Every single one of us wants it in every scope and every way of our life. So Allah gave us a methodology, a path in order to reach that perfection. And if we didn't have examples set forward with the Ahlul-bayt alayhimus salam, then we wouldn't know whether it would be really possible or not. Why is it that all other time periods had an imam to ask questions, but we don't? Who said you don't have an imam to ask? Who said that your imam is not present right now and that you can go and ask him a question? The point is, if you were to see your imam right now, what would you ask him? We alluded to this last night. Would you ask him how to make wudu? Would you ask him how to pray? Would you ask him about issues related to fiqh or history or aqa'id or other things that there are tons of books already written on? Would you ask him for something that's already been available to us for over 1400 years? Again, we said the imam is not here for that. The imam is looking for someone that's already past the initial stages. Look at the example of Karbala, for example. Those companions, those individuals who were with Imam Hussein alayhi salam, were people who were beyond the normal. They weren't the average followers of Ahlul-bayt, right? They were those who were reading their Salatul Layl normally. They understood the relationship of wilaya to such an extent that when the Imam said, you can have the bay'ah back, I give you that bay'at and that allegiance back and you can leave, they said, no, cut us to 1,000, 2,000, 20,000 pieces and keep bringing us back to life. We'll keep doing this over and over and over again and keep sacrificing ourselves for you. It wasn't about what was wajib and what was haram. For them it was about dedication, love, and sincerity towards Allah and His deen and to their Imam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight we are commemorating the wafat and the passing of one of the greatest ladies and greatest personalities of Islam, Sayyid Khadija al-Kubra alayha salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now normally when this kind of topic comes about, right, when it's a shahada or a wafat or a wilada, any sort of occasion where there's a personality involved, usually what happens is a speaker or a presenter will go through a historical analysis, right? They'll give birth date, when they died, maybe a life story, and then grab a lesson from that. For tonight, I want to go in a bit of a different direction. Personally, I believe that this kind of historical, statistical information, because it's available easily in books, you can Google it, you can find these things online, it's an injustice to say those same things from the minbar. These things are available for you and you can research that. Instead, I want to connect this night to some of the previous topics that we've already addressed. Namely, this idea about misconceptions in Islam, and specifically about identity in Islam. Right now we know, possibly to say now more than ever, anti-Islamic propaganda, Islamophobia is on the rise. Women are in the streets, they have their hijab pulled off. People are attacked in public. Masajid and our centers are being burnt down and vandalized. People now more than ever have this hatred towards our religion. Now what are some of the reasons that they themselves give as kind of a justification for their behavior? Why do they hate Islam so much? Why do they think that it's a satanic religion? Why do they think that it's barbaric or that it's backwards or irrational? The main reason that you'll find many of them give are that they point to certain Quranic verses, specifically what they call the violent verses. Right? These verses will say, for example, kill the kuffar, kill the unbelievers wherever you find them. So they take this verse, they say, look, you guys are violent, you're out to kill us infidels, so we can't live in harmony with you, we should kill you first. The other is that they say the inhumane behavior and corruption and treatment of individuals within certain so-called Islamic governments. So they see in certain countries, minorities are treated, they're oppressed, they don't have their rights. They see some other treatment of individuals there, of the citizens there, a lack of free speech, for example, or freedom of religion. And they say, see, this is what your Islam is. Islam is removing all these freedoms, whereas we in the free Western world stand for higher values. So we have a clash of civilizations. And because of this, we can't get along with you. That's another reason. Possibly the most important thing, or the most prominent reason that they bring up nowadays, is this idea of women's rights. They say women are oppressed in Islam, and we, in the enlightened Western world, we say that women have a high value, but you Muslims, you keep women down. You think of them as less. You think of them as nothing. You think of them as animals. So why would anybody want to ascribe to your faith? So our question is this: how do we go about solving these kind of issues? What is our response to these kind of misconceptions? Because we know that, obviously, these issues have to be addressed in one way or another. Interfaith gatherings and sessions and the iftars are one way to kind of combat misconceptions. We also have to realize, as we've mentioned a few nights ago, these kind of issues, misconceptions, and doubts within our religion is not just affecting non-Muslims, it's affecting Muslims too. And I gave you some of the evidence and statistics last time. Muslims are not praying anymore, right? About only 60% are fasting, which is a good number, but we would like it obviously to be higher than that. 20, according to some statistics, 20 to 40% of Muslims or people don't identify as Muslim anymore. They're leaving the faith. In many of our communities, and it wouldn't surprise me if in this community you have individuals who right now self-identify as atheists. They want to have nothing to do with this religion. And it's sad, it's a sad state of affairs, but we only have ourselves to blame for not handling this situation properly. If they don't leave the faith, then the other thing that happens is they move towards their own kind of interpretation of Islam. What we might call liberal or progressive interpretations of Islam, right? And they end up defining normal, traditional, conservative, or classical viewpoints that we would have in Islam. So for example, you have individuals like Irshad Manji, for those of you who may have heard of her, from Toronto. So she's been interviewed by Mehdi Hasan before, she has books, she's been in media, I believe she's had university positions before, she's very, very famous, right? By her own words, and you can see it in her book herself, and you can see it in her interviews, especially with Mehdi Hasan, where she talks about what drove her to a certain interpretation of Islam, to want to redefine and reinterpret the essential tenets of Islam. And she talks about how she had essential questions in her madrasa. And in that madrasa, when she asked her teacher questions, she was told basically to go away, don't ask, have blind faith. You had somebody who had sincere questions and they weren't getting the right answers. And now you see the effect. So who is to blame for someone like that? No, don't blame it on the media. Don't blame it on some government. We only have our own communities to blame for that. We as a community need to realize that these issues are real. They're infecting especially our youth more and more. And sometimes our elders who haven't had these issues solved for them from a young age, they've grown up. They may have certain levels of iman and maybe they practice. But in their household, if they really don't believe in what they're doing, how do you think their kids are going to turn out? Do you really think they want to have and inculcate and introduce a religious household if they don't actually buy all of these usul ad-din in the first place? No. We talked about it in our discussion on Muslim identity. The household is where Islam needs to start. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So now all of these issues, whether it's these violent verses or so-called violent verses in Quran or misunderstood verses, we would say, whether we're talking about the issue of governments which have a certain type of behavior and certain laws, or specifically for tonight, we're going to highlight this idea of women's rights because of Sayyida Khadija alayhi salam. How exactly should we approach these issues? So those of you who have attended lectures in majalis, you know that typically there's a few ways, a few different methodologies that speakers and presenters and scholars offer in order to solve these issues. The first method is a historical method. We're talking specifically now about the issue of women's rights. When someone comes and says we want to talk about women's rights in Islam, the role of women in Islam, the value that Islam gives to women, the first method they use is a historical method. So what does that mean? They say don't judge Islam by today's standard, judge it by those standards. How were women treated in history? Did Islam come and radically change and revolutionize and transform the culture and ideas that were within the Arabs of that time? So what are some examples that you already know? They said women had no rights back then. The first was how individuals thought it was normal to bury their daughters alive. They gave no value to women then, especially to daughters, so they would bury them alive. They said Islam came and said to do away with this practice. You have no right to bury women, to bury your daughters. The second was in terms of marriage rights. They say Islam, before it came, women had absolutely no rights within the Arabian Peninsula. Women were treated like animals, they were property. When Islam came, they gave women rights in marriage. For example, this dowry, the mahr that's there, the mahriya. Before this, the mahr, this dowry, was still existing in the Arabian time. But what would happen is, let's say somebody wanted to marry another tribe, a daughter from a certain tribe, they would take that money and would give it to the father or the head of the tribe, and they would keep that money for themselves. Where Islam came and said, listen, this contract, this marriage contract you're making, this mahr that has to be given, the woman, that bride-to-be needs to agree, and that becomes her property. Not the property of the tribe, not the property of the father or any other wali or guardian that's there. So they said this is another historical right that Islam came and gave. The next was divorce rights. Again, women had none back then. Islam came and gave certain types of divorce rights to women. And the last they mentioned is the right to ownership. Before, women had no rights. They couldn't own any property, anything. Even for many, many years in the United States itself, women had no right to property, they had no right to vote. And it took them many years for them to, through women's suffrage, to get those rights. Whereas Islam from the beginning said women have all of these rights, and they do have the right to own property, and they have wilaya over what they own. This is the first method, in order to show that Islam is quote-unquote progressive or contemporary. How? Because in history, women weren't treated right. Islam came and changed the whole dynamic. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The second way, the second methodology is a defensive and a reactionary methodology. And what is that? Somebody will give a specific verse or a specific ruling or law in Islam, and they're going to ask for our response. So what's one of the most famous ones is in chapter 4, Surah Nisa, verse 34. They first talk about wife beating. So look, it's telling us that you Muslims are allowed to beat your wives. You're allowed to hit your women. Is this the kind of religion you have that allows you to hit your wives? This is barbaric. So what happens is we give our reactionary response. We get defensive. We say, only hit her with a little twig. Right? That makes it sound so much nicer, doesn't it? No, it doesn't, obviously. You could hit your wife with a twig. Is that our response? In the verse also it says, "Ar-rijal qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa." Men are qawwamun. Now, I don't have time to go into the tafsir of this. Sometimes they translate it as guardians. Sometimes they say superiority. But for all intents and purposes, for what we have for today, they say men are superior to women. That's what your verse of Quran says. That's ridiculous. We believe in gender equality. So your religion is barbaric. So again, we try to say, well, you know what? That's because men have to have a certain type of, guardianship because women are weaker, so men have to protect them. Again, you get very reactionary and defensive. In court cases, you need 2 female witnesses instead of 1. 1 male, 2 female. They'll say, listen, there you go, Islam, Muslims, you're being unequal again. You're discriminating. You're considering women as less. So what do we respond? Sometimes it's the historical thing where, women back then, they weren't really social, they didn't really go out in the marketplace. So it didn't make sense for them that they would be able to witness things that happened. They couldn't see what was going on in society. That's why you needed 2 of them, just in case. What about getting less in inheritance? Right? In certain categories, women receive less than men. For example, daughters and sons. So what will we say? Well, sometimes we have a response, sometimes we don't. Hijab. Hijab is one of the favorite topics, right? Of course, they say hijab is oppressive, right? You're forcing women to do this. So our first response is no, we don't force women, but you take a look at many households today, and they do end up forcing their women, right? A father may force, yarhamukumullah, a father may force his daughter, or a husband may force his wife, say you cannot leave the house unless you're observing hijab. So sometimes it does take place. So that response may not always work. The other response is more of a socioeconomic response. We say, we give women freedom. We give them economic, social freedom. Why? Because men are disgusting animals, and we try to protect them from taken advantage of. I have to choose my words carefully because we have kids who are a bit younger, but you know what I mean. We have to protect women from this, because otherwise they're going to be used for ads for alcohol and beer. They're used for car commercials. Like, this is how you treat women. You objectify them. Whereas in Islam, we don't do that. Okay, now what's the problem? Many problems with that. One simple issue is, when you go to the Muslim world or Islamic countries, when they want to advertise for their products, are they using women or not? Yeah, maybe the woman on the billboards in hijab, but... So somebody can respond and say, okay, what about if in our Western society, we don't objectify women anymore? If we stop objectifying women, can we get rid of hijab now? The other response we give is this idea of modesty. A woman has to protect herself, again, because men are crazy animals. If a woman doesn't do that, then in public, she may be attacked or harassed by men. So Islam has prescribed this covering so that she is left alone. Now there's 2 ways they respond. They'll respond one way that, okay, if hijab is supposed to protect women from these advances and attacks, then what's going on in the Muslim world right now? Why are women still being harassed constantly? And their second response is, if hijab was made specifically, if this covering was made specifically for this the modesty issue, then why is it that it's wajib for women to observe hijab when they're praying by themselves, in their own house, in their own room? What do they have to fear for in their own house, privately? Why do they have to observe hijab then? So the issue I'm trying to get us to understand, and I want all of us to realize, is the responses that we give are not enough anymore. They're not enough for our communities, they're not enough for our elders, they're not enough for our youth, they're not enough for non-Muslims, they're not enough for society as a whole. We need to understand deeply, if we truly believe in this faith and we're being honest with ourselves, we need to take a new approach, especially when it comes to this issue of women in Islam. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Today I want to highlight and indicate towards a new response that our ulama have given that maybe we've heard, maybe we haven't heard before. And this approach is more of a philosophical and spiritual approach. Not just being reactionary, not just being historical. Finding out exactly what is the reality of women. When more importantly, what is the reality of gender differences? Or, if you want to go on the highest level, what is the reality of man? What is the reality of the human being? Why exactly are we here in the first place? We're going to allude to a few points tonight. The rest will continue on our discussion for the reason for creation. So now we have to see, how do other people respond to this question? Why are there women? Why do we have two genders? Why do we have two sexes? Why is it men and women, male and female? Why isn't there 3, 4, 10? Why is it like this? So first you look at a scientific response in terms of biology, evolution. What answers do they give? So of course, I don't want to turn it into a scientific lecture, but they themselves have their own different theories. Some will say that it's advantageous in terms of evolution for us to have two different parts of the species, right? Two different sexes, two different genders. They say that for genetic variation, it helps us. It helps us adapt over time to different conditions. Or they might say that after a while, let's say you have a negative mutation and you develop something which is detrimental to mankind, the other gender can kind of pick up the slack and lead to that repair in that kind of mutation, right? The other point that they make is that in terms of our survival, our physical survival, we need both of these genders there. They say that, for example, the egg of a woman has it's more energetic qualities in terms of its functions within the body, whereas a male sperm has less energetic qualities. This is so that each one has its own role, its own function, and it doesn't overexert itself. This is no religious stuff so far. This is just coming from evolutionary biology. What they say is that it had to have been divided into two to reduce the amount of work and assign specific responsibilities to both of the sexes and the genders. Now let's go to a more theological or a spiritual, philosophical idea. So why are we here? Why were we created? Well, let's go into the Quran first. We ask Allah, why did you make us? Why are we here? What's the purpose? And He says in Surah Al-Bariyat, chapter 56, verse 61, a verse that everybody knows, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. The only reason that I created jinn and humans is for ibadah, for worship. So now we step back and say, okay, what do you mean we're made just to worship? Are you saying, God, that you made us just so we can pray and fast and go on Hajj and divide up inheritance and follow rules? Like that's it? It's just a game of rules? That's all? Then, of course, we have the tafasir, which are connected to the ahadith. And they say that لِيَعْبُدُونَ here means لِيَعْرِفُونَ. And in the Arabic, there's actually a ya that's been cut off there. They say it's hidden there. So it's لِيَعْبُدُونِي, what? لِيَعْرِفُونِي. It's to worship me, Allah saying. I created you to worship me. And the deeper level is, I created you to have ma'rifat of me. To understand me, Allah, in irfani terms, in spiritual terms. Now, what does all that stuff mean? If you have an intended goal in mind, let's say you have a target, you have a goal, you have a purpose, you have a mission. There's two different ways that you can accomplish your goal. Maybe you have the ability, you have the power, you have the skill set, so you do it on your own, right? Otherwise, what you'll have to do is you have to rely on somebody else. Let's say, for example, you have some knowledge of computers, right? Let's say your internet goes off and you don't know how to reconnect to your wireless, for example. So you have general knowledge of computers. Maybe you can go into network connections and take a look. But beyond that, you don't know what to do. You need somebody else to kind of fill the void, whoever has knowledge of internet-related stuff from a computer, who knows about networking. You call them and they'll take care of it, right? So that gap that you have, somebody else needs to come and they have to fill that gap. So one type of individual, if you have your own expertise and knowledge, independently you can solve your problems, you can reach your goals and solve and complete your mission. The other type is you don't have enough information, you don't have enough power, you don't have enough capability and ability, so you're dependent on someone else or something else. Now think about, for example, in business. Maybe in your early stages of business, it can run on its own, maybe you're fairly independent. But after things and logistics gets more and more complicated, you realize, I have to start hiring other people. I have to start delegating. I might need an administrator, might need a secretary, I might need somebody to handle day-to-day, networking, etc., right? The more and more complicated things get, the more and more individuals you need that you'll be dependent on to run your day-to-day affairs, right? Okay. Now think about sports. In what sport do you have somebody that in and of themselves, by themselves, they're doing everything for the team? Even the best player in any sport, they still rely, in certain occasions, on their teammates, right? And what you see over here, especially if you look at sports like football, every single individual on that team, whether it's offense or defense or special teams, they need to play their position properly in order for everybody else to do what they have to do, right? So we're used to, for example, if, let's say, the quarterback throws a touchdown pass. So sometimes you attribute it to the wide receiver or whoever made the catch, like, that was his touchdown. Or you might say, you attribute it to the QB. It's like, okay, he threw that touchdown pass. But would either of them been able to do that if that line wasn't giving time for the quarterback? If they weren't holding it properly, right? Because the minute that line breaks, they come in, and the QB's got to hustle and move around. Let's say they get out of the pocket, things change, right? So everybody has to be doing their part, essentially and ideally, for everybody else to manifest and go towards their own perfection perfectly. So now what about us? What about our idea spiritually about women? Science tells us that we need women for physical survival and physical progress. Whereas Islam says that we need women for our spiritual progress and our spiritual survival. Now let me give you a quote from Imam Khomeini to highlight this point. Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah alayhi, says, the Holy Quran builds man, and women also build man. And here he means mankind in general, not just males. He says the duty of women here is building mankind, to build people. If building up human beings, if these types of women are taken away from our nations and taken away from our societies, then our societies, our nations will be destroyed. They'll end up and transform into failure and materialism and decadence. They'll be defeated and corrupted. He says elsewhere, women are the manifestation and realization of mankind's hopes, desires, and wishes. Women are educators. They're nurturers of honorable men and women. From the lap of women, this is how men and mankind gets to ascend to heaven. Right? We know the famous hadith that heaven lies under the feet of mothers. The lap of women is a place for education of great men and women. Now, let's put this into perspective. So for the Quranic verses that we hear, like for example the ones that say go out and, let's say, kill unbelievers, or other verses which are controversial and you have misconceptions, what is our typical response? We say, you're taking things out of context, right? Like, no, look at the verse before, look at the verse after, why was the verse revealed, look at the historical context. It doesn't just literally mean to go and kill unbelievers. Sometimes with a hadith, we have the same thing. If you find a hadith which is a little sketchy, you say the same thing. Listen, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of other ahadith. You have to look at the context, you have to look at the other ahadith, you have to check the chain of narrations, all these things are there too. Right? So we say you can't just take one hadith and build everything based on that. So now, for us, why is it the case that we take one rule about women, one idea about women in Islam, and try to build a whole understanding of women based on that? One verse about, for example, allegedly wife beating. One verse that says that men are superior to women. One rule in Islam says that women inherit less than men. One rule says that 2 witnesses are needed. If you take all of these rulings by themselves in a vacuum, of course it's going to sound ridiculous. It's not going to make any sense. If you put these things within a proper Islamic context, what do we mean by that? Islam is a project. What kind of project? It's not something for us to just sit at home with our tasbih and recite our prayers here and there. Islam is designed as a way of life. If Allah's saying the reason I created you is to get to know me, it's not that you get to know God in your house, so when you go outside, no holds barred, you get to do whatever you want. What happens is Islam is offering a project, a civilizational project. Allah is showing us if you want to live your life and you want society to progress fully, you want to develop a perfect society, a perfect civilization, you have to follow all of these rules. You can't just pick one or the other. You have to take all of these things together. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So now, with this in mind, we can understand a bit better how some of these rules make sense. You see, and I'm not saying this in order to appease anybody, but women literally in Islam are like queens and princesses. What do I mean by that? They have no duties. Or in other words, they have much, much, much less duties than other people have, than men. They get discounts in many different sections of Islam. Right? They don't have that many responsibilities as compared to men do. But why is that the case? It's because their essential duties of raising up mankind is their main purpose. Allah wants to make sure that their mind, their body, their spirituality, everything is protected and that there's no other burdens or obstacles in their way that might give them unnecessary stress and anxiety. Because if that stress comes, if that anxiety comes, they won't be able to carry out their essential duty properly. And even that duty of building up mankind is, we're talking from a philosophical, a spiritual perspective. It's the ideal duty and responsibility of a woman. A woman doesn't even have to do that in terms of Sharia. It's not wajib for her to do that. Let me give some examples. Sometimes critics of Islam complain that, women are the slave of men. Wives become the slave of women. Wives become the slave of their husbands. And I would respond to this person. I said, listen, have you actually read the fiqh, the ahkam related to man and wife? Have you looked at the ahkam in marriage? Men have 2 rights on women, whereas according to many of our maraji, women have 101 rights over men. Now this is where the men start getting a little like, okay, I think this is where you cut off the mic now, right? And don't worry, I'm not going to mention all of them today, don't worry. Women don't have to do a thing. They can literally sit at home, collect their nafaqah, which is the wajib amount that their man has to provide. A husband has to provide nafaqah, right? Whatever that woman, whatever your wife was used to getting from in her previous family, meaning under her parents. If they were, for example, providing her with, let's just say, $1,000 a month, that's just like an allowance. The husband, wujuban, wajib for them to provide that same amount if the wife wants it. He would have to do that. If she was, for example, getting new shoes and new clothes, let's say once a week, then that means once a week you got to take her shopping. That's what's going to happen. She has the right to ask for these things. Yeah, I heard La ilaha illallah. Oof. Ya Allah. What else? What about chores? What about household work? Now we know the story of Imam Ali and Bibi Fatima alayhi salam splitting up the work. Yeah, we know that, it's nice. But technically, women, if they want to, they can sit in the house and do nothing all day. They don't have to do any work in the house. It's not wajib for them to do that. Mustahab, yes, not wajib. What about nursing children? Again, they don't have to do that. If they want to, they can. On top of that, they can even charge their husband and say, if you want me to nurse and you want me to feed this child, I want you to pay up for that. Right? Women have all these rights that they can ask for. Otherwise, she can sit on the couch with a mango lassi, sit there, watch some Bollywood movie, halal Bollywood movies, whatever that means, right? And she can just enjoy her life as being a queen, as being a princess, and nothing else, no duties on her. This is what Islam has accorded to women. You don't have to go out and work. Why? Because the man's has to provide you everything you need. And on top of that, if her male relatives pass away, she'll collect from that too. Basically, it's almost as if Allah says, listen, you need to sit in the house and have your patience, your stress levels, your mental health and well-being intact. So that means we'll take care of your financial status from all different ways. Your husband's going to pay up whatever you need. Your father will take care of you. Your other relatives, everybody will take care of you there. If you don't want to do any housework, fine, don't do that. If you don't want to take care of the kids, fine, don't do that. But what is your essential duty? Your essential duty is to build up mankind. Because even if you don't want to do any of these mustahab duties, when it comes to raising a child, that's when a woman's fitrah now speaks up. Physiologically, biologically speaking, there is no comparison to the childbirth phase. There is nothing compared to child rearing that a mother goes through than a father can. You can't compare the two. That connection that a mother builds to the child is nothing compared to what a father has to the child. You cannot do that. A woman is there 9 months, physically, spiritually, emotionally connected to this child. And men, we're just sitting there like, are you okay? You need something? Huh? Yeah, you want me to get some ice cream? That's whatever, that's the best we can do, right? Take care of their cravings. Do we really understand their pain? Do we really understand what they go through? No, we never will. Islam has said men, husbands, fathers have to take care of these women as best as possible. Make sure they're under no stress, no pain, no discomfort. Why? Because they can either build the society or they can destroy it. Let me give you a few examples, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. If you look at some of the personalities throughout history, the ones who are connected to divine personalities, meaning either families of the prophets or families of the imams, they say the deciding factor, whether that child, the child of ma'asum, the child of a prophet or an imam, comes out as a mu'min or a Muslim, as a follower of Ahlul-bayt, that defining, determining quality and characteristic is the mother. You look to the mother, you can figure out whether this child will come out right or not. Let me give an example. Look at the story of Nabi Nuh alayhi salam. You had certain children that were from his line, from one mother, who were believers. They boarded the ark with him. But we know from the verse of the Quran and our history, one of his children did not board. He did not go on the ark. He didn't trust his father. He didn't trust his prophet. And they say, why? It's because of his mother, because of the training that that specific mother gave that child. So this child's intellect was destroyed. It was weakened. Let's give other examples. Look at the example of, for example, we can look at some of the examples of the imams. You have certain children from the imams where the wives are perfect and the children come out ma'asum or close to ma'asum. Some of the other children that come about, what happens is they start claiming imamat for themselves, as we mentioned before. Or they steal from the imams, they steal from the Baytul Mal. Why? All of this is because the training of the mother was different. Let's go back to another prophet. Look at Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam, Prophet Jacob. He had many different wives. From one of his wives, you get Binyamin and Yusuf. Right? Two righteous individuals, one of them being a prophet. And according to some narrations, Yusuf was also an imam of his time. And who were the brothers that threw him in the well? Everyone else. Where did they come from? They came from the other wives, the other mothers. You see, one mother has two children that inherit wilayat, inherit nubuwat, inherit prophethood and imamat. The other mothers, the other wives of the Prophet Jacob, you see, these children turn out so bad that they're ready to throw the son of a prophet into a well and sell him off into slavery. This is the difference that a mother makes. So all those misconceptions, all the presumptions and assumptions we have aside, throw that away. If you want the intellect of your child to grow, then you need to make sure that that mother is being taken care of. If there's any weakness in that child's intellect, it's going to be because of that mother. You know this hadith about heaven lying under the feet of the mother? Usually what mothers do is they take that as an iftikhar, as a sense of pride, right? So you know what, be careful, heaven's under my feet. Whereas if they really thought about it, they have to look at it the other way too. Say, listen, heaven is under your feet, but so is hellfire. If you want your child to get to heaven, you need to raise them under your feet properly. Because if not, you might lead them to hellfire. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. One last point and then we'll move on to the musibah and ghambayan. So now when we're looking and re-examining the trends that are happening in today's society, where all these issues about gender equality and gender relations, educations, we talk about segregation, whether it's inside the center or outside the center, related to politics, all these things. We need to understand these ideologies that are coming about, feminism, et cetera, where are these things coming from? Where is this idea of creating equality and sameness among genders coming from? You guys can do your research. I'll give you a few points to look at. It's interesting to note that the Rockefeller family were the ones who were the biggest proponents for women coming into the workforce. This modern style of education that we have is from that time as well. What we see now are women who want to say, I want the same rights as men. I want to have the same position as a CEO. I want to come and raise myself up and be famous and known in society, in the workforce. I want a position. I want notoriety. Islam was saying, you can sit and be a queen and a princess in your house. The rest of society is saying, why don't you come be our slave and work for our capitalistic machine? Look at how they've messed our minds up so much. If I told any of you that you can collect an income, a viable income, and you can sit in your house and do nothing, or you can come out and work yourself to the bone, blood, sweat, and tears, and maybe you'll make that same amount, maybe you won't. It's a risk, but you'll have to work constantly, you'll get tired and you'll get stressed. Think about what you would choose. This idea of being in the public domain as well, I don't want to get into that, but I would suggest those to look into the lives of the Ahlul-bayt and see what kind of lives did they live, how much were they actually in the public domain, and when they actually came out in public, was that the exception to the rule or the actual rule? Something for us to think about as well. So I would encourage all of you who are interested in the discussion about women or gender roles itself, look at it from now the philosophical and the spiritual perspective. If you do that, you'll get a different idea. And understand that Islam is not just giving 1, 2, 3, 4 rules randomly. All of these things are meant to happen in conjunction, together. These rules are meant for an Islamic household. These rules are meant for an Islamic community, an Islamic society, and Islamic civilization at large. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now hopefully with these points in mind, now perhaps we can understand a bit better the status of Bibi Khadija alayha salam. And maybe more importantly, we can recognize why is it that the heart of the Prophet was so broken and so shattered when he lost his wife. No, they say Aam al-Huzn, the year that he lost Abu Talib and then he lost Khadija, according to some narrations. The year of grief, the year of depression, the year of mourning. But that's not where it stops. Because we know from the narrations, from the history, that the Prophet, every time he thought of Khadija, he would break down and shed tears. So much so that even the other wives became jealous. They say, why are you thinking of this old lady like this? Look how they disrespected our holy mother Khadija. Why do you give her so much importance? And the Prophet responded, you have no idea what Khadija did for me. She was my first supporter. She was the first Muslim. Not that she was the first female Muslim. She was the first Muslim, the first one to accept my message when everybody else was out to deny me, was out to suppress me, was out to murder me. She was there as my physical comfort, as my emotional comfort, as my spiritual comfort. This is what Khadija did for our Prophet. Do you know, we're talking about being a princess, we're talking about being a queen. Within Arabia, again, we need to understand who Khadija was. That's how we can understand her status. Khadija herself was known as Malikatul Arab, Malikatul Quraysh. She was the princess, the queen of Quraysh, the queen of the Arabs. She had a celebrity status among them. Everybody knew who she was for two reasons. One is because of her greatness, her purity, her character. And the second was because of her success in business and her wealth. Nobody matched her status. No one did. And imagine, this is a society, these tribal Arab societies that they lived in, they didn't want to praise and honor anybody else from any other tribe. Because of that tribal mentality, they only praised and honored people from within their own tribe. But Khadija alayha salam was so loved and honored by people that people from all tribes in the Arab society called her the queen of the Quraysh, the queen of the Arabs. This is the status she held. So now you can understand, when she gave everything up for the Prophet, she didn't just give up her wealth, she gave up her name. She gave up everything that she was known for in that Arab society. Imagine that. A place where you were the #1 individual in society, and she gave it all up and went to the opposite extreme. She became one of the most hated people in the Arab society. Both of those traits she sacrificed for the sake of the Prophet. And you see, this is how Allah rewards her. She gives up the dunya, she gives up help, she gives up the help from worldly individuals. Allah says, I'll come back and I'll give you A reward from akhirah. I'll give you heavenly rewards. I'll give you help from heavenly individuals. When she was in delivery and giving birth to Our Lady Fatima alayha salam. When she was giving birth to Lady Fatima, who was there to help her? The Arabs were known to go help one another, to have midwives would come and they would take care of each other, even if they were from different tribes. This was the most famous woman among the Arabs, and nobody came to her when she was in the pangs of childbirth. But Allah says, you gave up the dunya, I'll give you akhirah. Allah sends down 4 angels from heaven, 4 heavenly ladies in order to help her with her childbirth. This is the reward that Khadija got. Now we move to her deathbed and her passing. She gave up everything. She gave up her physical status. She gave up her emotional status. She gave up everything for the Prophet, for Islam. And because of this took a toll on her body. This took a toll on her mind. This took a toll, and she developed a fever towards the end of her life. As she was on her deathbed, as she was weakened by hunger, by sacrifices, by the sanctions, everything that the Prophet went through, she was there too, going through that same hunger, those same sanctions when they were in the valley of Abu Talib. Everything the Prophet did, she was there with him, every step of the way. She gave up all of that wealth for him. She could have had anything she wanted. Everything she gave up so she could taste that same Islam that the Prophet tasted. They say in those last moments, that fever became so harsh, it was so rough on her body that it became difficult for her to breathe. She was struggling and mustering courage to try to breathe. And the Prophet, according to some, was trying to calm her down and say, my dear wife, my beloved, don't take these breaths. Save your breath, pass in comfort. Leave me like this. Why do you have to speak to me now? I know your status. Allah is waiting for you. The prophets are waiting for you. But she wanted to say a few more things to the Prophet before she passed. Now, what did she want to say to the Prophet? What did she want to say to her husband, to Rasulullah before she left this world? She didn't open her mouth with her last breath and complain about her wealth and her status. She didn't complain about her sacrifices. She says, Ya Rasulullah, have I done enough for you? Ya Rasulullah, I've done injustice to you. There's so much more I could have done for you. And she was saying, what are you saying, my beloved wife? You've given up everything for me. You gave up everything for Islam. There's nothing more you could do for me. Then she mentioned one more thing. Ajrukum Allah. He says, our young daughter Fatima, Ya Rasulullah, our Fatima, now she's in your hands. And you know that all the hate, all the anger, all the animosity that the Arabs have towards me, you know that they're gonna take this out and show it to Fatima now. You have to protect her, you have to take care of her. We want to say to you, Ya Khadija, the Prophet tried his best, but he couldn't do so. Imam Ali tried his best, but he couldn't do so. Those vile men from the Arab society still went after your daughter Fatima. And look at the training that Khadija gave to Fatima. The same way that Khadija was speaking to her husband on her deathbed was the same way that Fatima spoke to her husband on her deathbed. When Khadija says to the Prophet, aren't you happy with me? Can I do more for you? I did injustice to you. We see Bibi Fatima with Imam Ali saying, Araditani ya Abul Hasan. Are you pleased with me, Ya Abul Hasan? This is the training of a mother to her daughter. Ya Abul Hasan, I didn't do enough for you. I'm leaving my kids with you. Ya Abul Hasan. No one will be able to understand the way that Khadija, as a mother, left her great daughter Fatima. على لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره. Ya Allah, we ask you by the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad to forgive all mu'mineen, mu'minat, muslimin and muslimat. Ya Allah, we ask you by the right of our great holy mother Khadija alayhi salam that you protect all of our mothers, have all the women follow in her footsteps. And Ya Allah, we know that Bibi Khadija is not an example just for our mothers, just for our women. We know that her sacrifices are also an example and a lesson for the men in our community as well. In the same way that Khadija gave up everything despite her wealth, her status, and everything she enjoyed, everything she gave up for Islam, we ask that you give us the tawfiq, whether we're men or women, you give us that same ability for those of us who have that financial, emotional, physical capability to give up everything for the sake of Islam, especially to help support centers and masajid like this. Ya Allah, we ask you by the right of Sayyidah Khadija that you give us the strength to help us raise a child, especially our daughters, the same way that Sayyidah Khadija was able to raise Sayyidah Fatima. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.